The Man in the Withered Garden. The first time Evelyn saw the man who moved into the old house at the end of the street, she felt an inexplicable chill. He arrived in the dead of night, his lone figure illuminated by the dim glow of the street lamp as he unloaded a few battered suitcases from a rusting car. No one welcomed him, no one helped. He disappeared inside without so much as a glance at the curious eyes peering through curtains. The house had been empty for years, its once beautiful garden overrun with weeds and decay. Weeks passed, and the new neighbor remained a ghost. The curtains stayed drawn, the house silent. Children whispered rumors of hauntings, and adults simply avoided the property. But Evelyn watched, not out of malice, but curiosity, no concern. Something about the house, about him, stirred something deep inside her. He never left for groceries, never checked the mail. The only sign of life was a dim light glowing from a single window at night. It wasn't until she walked past the house one early morning that she noticed the garden, or what was left of it. Once a masterpiece of vibrant roses and ivy-covered trellises, it now lay in ruin. Vines strangled the porch, dead leaves carpeted the ground, and the scent of decay lingered in the air. An impulse struck her. She had always loved gardens. Her mother had taught her that tending to plants was a form of tending to the soul. So, with a deep breath, she knocked on his door. The sound echoed, unnatural in the stillness. A long pause followed before the door creaked open, revealing him. The man was pale, his face hollow, eyes dark as an abyss. He stared at her, silent. Evelyn swallowed her nerves and forced a smile. "I noticed your garden could use some help," she said, forcing a casual tone. "Would you mind if I cleaned it up a bit?" For a moment, he said nothing. Then, in a voice that sent a shiver down her spine, he murmured, "I needed someone to notice me." There was a sadness in his voice that was almost unbearable. She hesitated, but then nodded. The next morning, she arrived with gardening tools. As she worked, she felt his presence behind the window, watching. She wasn't sure whether to feel comforted or unnerved. Each day, she returned. She unearthed buried flower beds, pruned overgrown hedges, and pulled weeds that had long claimed dominance. Slowly, the garden began to breathe again, and so did he. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, he finally stepped outside. He watched her work in silence before kneeling beside her. He helped her plant a rose bush, his hands trembling as they touched the earth. "My wife loved roses," he whispered. Evelyn turned to him, realization dawning. "She lived here?" He nodded. This was her garden. She died here. The wind howled through the trees as silence stretched between them. Evelyn's heart ached. "I'm so sorry." He exhaled, as if he had been holding his breath for years. "After she was gone, I left. Couldn't bear to stay. But something called me back." His gaze darkened. "But I'm not alone here." A cold shiver crawled up Evelyn's spine. "What do you mean?" He hesitated before speaking. "At night, I hear her voice." Evelyn glanced at the house. A shadow flickered behind the window. She stiffened. "You think it's her?" His lips trembled. "I don't know what I believe anymore." That night, Evelyn lay awake, thoughts racing. Was it grief, playing tricks on his mind, or something else? Determined, she returned the next day and stayed late. As darkness enveloped the garden, she heard it. A whisper, faint, like the wind through the trees. But it was a voice. The man stood frozen, his face pale as death. "You hear it too?" Evelyn nodded, her heart pounding. What does she want? Tears welled in his eyes. Forgiveness. The garden, she realized, was a tombstone of sorrow. He had left, abandoned his grief, but it had never left him. It had grown, tangled with the weeds, suffocating what once bloomed. His wife's voice, whether real or a memory, called him back not for torment, but for closure. Together, they tended the last of the garden. On the final day, as the last rose was planted, the whispers ceased. A warmth settled in the air. The man stood beside Evelyn, the weight lifted from his shoulders. He turned to her, gratitude shining in his eyes. "Thank you." And for the first time, the house no longer looked haunted. The past had been laid to rest. As Evelyn walked away, she glanced back one last time. The man stood in the moonlight, no longer a shadow of himself. The garden flourished once more, and somewhere in the breeze, she swore she heard a sigh of peace.
Whispering Echoes.